Welcome to the Depth Dive. Today, we're really jumping into the deep end, you could say. We're looking at subtle realities, specifically exploring a whole stack of sources focused on the inner metaphysical life of animals. Okay, let's unpack this. This is pretty fascinating because the material we're drawing on, it comes from these detailed esoteric investigations, hypnotic work mainly, and it claims to map out the consciousness of different species, everything from gorillas to your house cat. So our mission here is kind of threefold. First, we want to understand how animal minds are structured. Are they collective, individual? Then do they have things like karma and reincarnation? And maybe most importantly, we really need to spend some time on how this information is gathered. The methodology is key.
Absolutely. That context is crucial because, well, we're moving beyond just a simple conscious or not conscious view. It's not an on-off switch. What these observations suggest is that sentience is more like a spectrum.
A spectrum.
Yeah, and it seems to vary dramatically. Depends on the species, apparently, and also the level of consciousness that entity, the consciousness operating the body, has actually achieved.
Okay, so let's start with that first big distinction the investigations found.
Yeah.
The structure of the mind itself, collective versus individual. What did they find at that fundamental level?
Well, for quite a few species, and the sources often use gorillas as the main example, they seem to operate under a single, unified gorilla collective consciousness.
A single consciousness for all gorillas.
Kind of. Think of it less like separate minds and more like a single energetic root system. The individual physical gorillas are more like nodes, or just physical parts connected back to this one big, unified entity.
So if they're just parts of a whole, does that mean if one gorilla gets hurt physically, it sort of ripples through the whole collective?
Yeah.
Energetically or emotionally?
That's strongly implied, yes. Their main energetic connection, their loyalty, is to that group entity first and foremost. Now, that's not all animals. Some species do have a more individualized consciousness, but even those seem to be connected to something bigger. The observations pointed to this powerful, shared egregore that covers all animals on Earth.
Right, egregore. We should probably define that term straight away for everyone listening. It sounds pretty technical. What exactly is this planetary animal egregore in this context?
Think of it like a massive shared, maybe a psychic operating system,
Or
a collective thought form. And the main information stored in this huge structure is specifically about instinctive behaviors.
instincts.
Yeah, the fundamental actions, the reactions that make, say, a wolf or a fish. It defines the species. And apparently every animal consciousness is plugged into this egregore. It's like the ultimate library of species identity and instinct.
Okay, that distinction alone really highlights the gap between animal and human experience, doesn't it? So if you put animal consciousness side by side with human consciousness, what's the single biggest difference, according to these sources?
It really comes down to that collective component. That seems to be the defining feature of the animal experience in these observations. Human consciousness, on the other hand, is seen as fundamentally individual, unique in its core essence, designed maybe to operate without that species-wide instinct tether.
Interesting. And the energetic anatomy, how they're built, energetically speaking, that also seems quite different. Let's jump to those differences they noted on the physical or maybe physical energetic plane.
Yeah, this was fascinating. The differences are structural. When they looked energetically, animals were seen to have more chakras than humans.
More chakras, really?
Yeah, some are apparently located along the spine, like ours, but many others are in different, distinct spots on the physical body, not where you'd expect them based on the human model.
Huh, more chakras. That suggests a pretty different way of processing energy, interacting with the world. What's the implication? Does it mean they operate at a higher frequency or differently?
It probably just means they're wired for a different energetic purpose, likely tied back to that collective connection we were talking about. But here's a key point. Despite those physical and energetic structural differences, when the investigation looked at how consciousness functions on the etheric plane,
Okay, the etheric plane, remind us.
sort of the functional blueprint, the non-physical layer of consciousness. On that level, animal and human consciousness appeared fundamentally similar in their functioning. They seem to share the same basic architecture for mental and emotional operations, at least at a base level.
All right. So similar function, different structure. Let's move on to how this unique structure impacts those big concepts, karma and reincarnation. If animals are tied into an egregore, how does something like karmic debt even work for them?
That's a great question. When the investigators asked about karma specifically, the term apparently didn't quite fit or translate directly for animals. Instead, the way entanglement works seemed to be perceived more as a kind of matrix creation system.
Matrix creation.
Yeah. And it wasn't necessarily linked to, say, moral failure, like human karma often is. It seemed connected more to restrictive beliefs or, and this is critical, to external interferers.
Okay, so calling it matrix creation instead of karma. Why is that shift in language important? What does it imply?
Well, it seems significant because it places the source of the entanglement more externally. Human karma is often discussed as, self-generated debt from past actions, moral or ethical choices. But for animals, the experience described here is being subject to cycles that are kind of imposed or at least leveraged by outside factors, the environment, maybe limiting beliefs pushed onto them, or these external entities.
Which implies they are caught in a reincarnation cycle, but maybe they aren't always the ones designing that cycle.
Exactly. The sources indicate animals do reincarnate, yes,
Yeah.
but often they're sort of projected into these cycles by these interferers. The reasoning given was that the animals are perceived as not free, energetically speaking. It sounds quite similar, actually, to how interfered human consciousness is sometimes described in these frameworks.
Wow. Okay, what about the intense emotional bonds people form with pets? Does that fit into this?
Oh, definitely. The sources suggest there's a strong possibility for really deep karmic links. Maybe energetic links is better between specific people and their pets across different lifetimes.
Across lifetimes?
Yeah. And these connections are specifically rooted in shared, powerful emotional experiences. Things like intense love, joy, but also suffering or abandonment. They seem tied to shared past lives, suggesting these emotional connections create obligations maybe on both sides.
So does the strength of that specific human-animal bond create a unique kind of energetic tie, something different from that general species matrix creation or egregore connection?
Yes, absolutely. These emotional links sound highly individualized. They're not like the general instinct-based connection to the egregore. A specific pet can form this singular, intense bond that operates quite separately from the collective structure.
Okay, that leads us directly into interference. Can these external entities actually use animals, leverage them against humans?
Apparently, yes. Animals can be manipulated or even possessed by entities. Interestingly, the term extraterrestrial didn't always resonate in the sessions regarding this, but the presence of non-human entities acting through animals was definitely noted.
If entities are doing this, using animals, did the source material give any clues about how someone could tell the difference? Between just normal pet behavior, maybe acting out, and actual external manipulation designed to cause problems.
The main clue noted seems to be the intent behind the action and the result. So if the animal's behavior consistently leads to destabilization for the human, provoking intense anger, fear, maybe even persistent unexplained physical pains or problems, and that behavior seems really out of character, not instinctual, that's when interference might be suspected. And it's not just pets. They mentioned entities using wild creatures too. Things like tigers, bees, even marine animals were cited as instruments.
Hamster.
Yeah, used specifically to provoke those strong negative human emotions or to cause physical harm, like pain or accidents leading to disability. The investigators felt the objective was always just to put spokes in the wheels of the human world, and presumably to harvest the resulting negative energy.
Okay. Here's where it gets really interesting. Let's talk about individualization. If an animal starts out mainly as part of a collective consciousness, what does it actually take for it to break free, to achieve genuine, singular self-awareness?
Well, the level of consciousness an animal reaches seems to be determined by the sum total of its experiences of life. And that includes previous incarnations, potentially different kinds of animals, maybe even plants, or sometimes even humans, and whatever knowledge it manages to retain from all that. It sounds like a vast, slow accumulation of learning across many, many different forms.
So the key ingredient is just diversity of experience, living lots of different lives.
That seems to be a huge part of it. But also, crucially, will. The sources emphasize that the decisive shift, the move from being primarily collective to becoming truly individualized, results from the animal's own will.
Its own choice.
Yeah. Driven by things like curiosity, wanting to live different kinds of lives, maybe observing humans or other more individualized animals and wanting that experience. And also drawing on the knowledge and information gained from all those past lives. It's framed as a deliberate internal push.
And when this shift happens, when an animal starts to individualize, the investigation apparently saw dramatic, actual energetic changes in its energy fields. Can you describe those shifts?
Oh, they sounded profound.
Hmm.
As an animal consciousness individualizes, its energetic bodies, specifically the mental, emotional, and sexual bodies, they don't just change a little bit, they apparently expand dramatically. And they become much more fluid.
It sounds almost like an energetic awakening or something.
It really does. For instance, in the mental and emotional bodies, the movement within them shifts from being described as slow, maybe sluggish, to becoming rapid and really dynamic. And the colors change too. They become bright and vivid, moving away from the sort of pale, dull, or the term used as term kind of muted quality that the collective consciousness often showed.
And what about the connection back to the species egregore?
Right, that crucial tether. It's apparently connected via the sexual body.
Yeah.
And as the consciousness individualizes more and more, that connection becomes increasingly thin and fragile, described like a single fine thread that looks like it could easily break.
That fragility implies there's maybe a risk involved in breaking free entirely. Okay, moving beyond individualization. The sources mentioned some animals actively want to incarnate as humans. Why?
They do, apparently. Some animal consciousnesses actively pursue human incarnation. The reasons given were either because of very positive past life experiences with humans, creating a strong affinity, or sometimes just sheer curiosity, wanting to experience something totally new.
But knowing this framework, the interferers probably don't just let that natural progression happen, do they?
Unfortunately, no. The sources indicate that entities sometimes try to force an animal consciousness, particularly one that hasn't fully individualized yet, into a human body.
Force them? Why?
It seems to be purely opportunistic, either for experimentation just to see what happens, or, more darkly, to deliberately generate and then harvest the intense energy that comes from the suffering caused by that mismatch, that feeling of displacement.
And when an animal consciousness is forced like that, skipping the necessary steps, what are the actual consequences for the human being that results in their life?
The sources were quite clear on this, that resulting human incarnation faces massive ongoing energetic upheaval simply because, as they put it, it doesn't match. They used a dolphin consciousness forced into a human body prematurely as an example.
A dolphin? Wow, what happens?
It manifests as these profound feelings of just incomprehension, a constant sense of, what am I doing here? Deep, deep feelings of solitude, alienation, inferiority complex, and often chronic physical problems too. The internal energetic conflict basically creates chaos on both the mental and physical levels.
That actually provides a really interesting potential context for people who have those intense, lifelong feelings of not belonging, of being alien here. So are there certain animal species that are already observed as being inherently further along this path, more naturally individualized?
Yes, apparently so. Due to their species' basic way of functioning, and maybe because they have a more frequent history of past lives as humans or other humanoid forms, some species just seem to exhibit a naturally higher, more individualized level of consciousness.
Which ones? Who are the frontrunners, according to this research?
The ones specifically cited were apes and monkeys, dolphins, and also orcas and whales. They seem naturally more advanced in this way. Domestic animals, though, like our cats and dogs, they seem to vary hugely based on their individual soul's journey and experiences.
Okay, let's circle back to cats and dogs, our closest companions. What's the energetic impact of that strong human-pet bond? How does our love affect their development?
It seems to be exponentially positive. That bond of unconditional love coming from a human apparently expands the animal's energetic bodies, makes them more fluid, more rhythmic, described almost like a steady, amplified heartbeat in their energy fields.
Then that leads to?
It increases the animal's confidence, broadens its understanding of other species, and often seems to provide that final encouragement, that final push needed for them to choose a future human incarnation, if that's their path.
What about communication? That feeling many pet owners have of almost knowing what their animal is thinking.
Animals that are really close to humans often desire a strong telepathic link. They want smoother communication, a way to share information easily, and just to reinforce that bond of love. And interestingly, the source material noted this telepathy channel is perceived as being always open from the animal side.
Always open.
Yet even if the human is completely unaware of it, not consciously receiving or sending on that frequency, the animals are apparently always broadcasting, always listening on that level. So if we connect this to the bigger picture, we've just walked through this incredibly detailed map of subtle phenomena, animal consciousness, reincarnation, interference. But now we absolutely have to address the foundation this knowledge is built on. We have to talk about the methodology itself. the extreme challenges of this kind of esoteric investigation.
Yes, this is so crucial. We have to look at these claims, no matter how specific and fascinating they are, through a lens of, well, pretty extreme skepticism regarding the data source itself. What's the fundamental problem acknowledged in the sources about getting information from just one hypnotic session?
The fundamental problem is contamination. Massive contamination.
Right.
The source material itself is very upfront about this. Information gathered from a single session is considered highly contaminated. The percentage of distortion, of just noise or inaccuracy, is seen as dangerously high.
They used an analogy to explain why, didn't they? Which I found helpful.
Yes, it's likened to trying to have a conversation with someone while you're both completely underwater. And on top of that, you're trying to speak two different languages. The message gets distorted just by the medium itself, the density of the subtle realms, maybe, but it also gets massively distorted by the human filter.
The person under hypnosis.
Exactly. Their culture, their personal beliefs, their language structure, their own traumas, their expectations, all of it contaminates the signal coming through.
So contamination from the medium, the message, and the messenger. Given that, how on earth do they establish anything reliable? If one session is basically, as you said, potentially garbage data.
Well, to establish something as a reliable fact, say, the exact function of a specific type of etheric implant or the precise characteristics of a certain entity, the same piece of data has to be corroborated independently across an abnormally large number of sessions, with completely different people undergoing hypnosis.
How large are we talking?
Potentially thousands. Thousands of independent sessions, all pointing to the exact same detail.
Wow. Okay, that's an immense filtering process. So what percentage of all the information gathered actually makes it through that rigorous cross-checking and gets deemed reliable?
A tiny fraction.
Yeah.
Really tiny. Only the information that is common, that shows up consistently across the vast majority of all these independent sessions, is considered reliable enough to be treated as, factual data within their framework. The sources estimate this might be as low as only 2 or 3% of the total data gathered in all those sessions.
2 or 3%.
Sometimes, yes. The rest, using the investigator's own rather blunt term, is deemed garbage information, or spazzatura, unusable noise.
Okay, the implication for you, the listener, is crystal clear then. You have to view any specific account, even something as detailed and compelling as the description of a tiger's emotional body, individualizing with intense caution. Unless it's explicitly stated to be part of that very small percentage, that rigorously cross-corroborated data set.
Precisely. And this incredibly high contamination rate is why the investigative work has to be broken down into these very restricted specific topics. You focus intensely on investigating just one thing, one historical event, one specific condition, one type of entity across many sessions. You can't just ask generic questions about life after death and expect reliable synthesis. It allows for manageable data filtering.
So what does this all mean? We've certainly covered a lot today, navigated some really stunning, subtle, and, as we now understand, incredibly difficult to verify information. We've talked about this quiet hierarchy in animal consciousness, the potential risks of forced human incarnation, and the profound, seemingly accelerating energetic effect of simple, unconditional human love and even telepathy on an animal's journey.
And maybe a final thought to leave you with, building on all this. Given this deep, subtle, energetic interplay that seems to exist between humans and animals, and considering the extreme, almost overwhelming difficulty in acquiring clean, uncontaminated knowledge about this reality, what responsibility do we actually bear towards, say, that collective animal egregore, just by the very act of trying to investigate and understand it? What are the ethics involved in probing a realm where apparently every interpretation, every belief we hold might instantly shape the reality we're observing? Something to perhaps consider next time you look into your pet's eyes and see that spark, that hint of individuality looking back at you.